Okay, welcome back, President Delaney. It's always a joy to be, in a room with you and get to listen to you present. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Up till now, you've heard from two research universities, two very fine research universities, and I like Judy Genshaft's comments that universities like different flavors of ice cream. I think think of maybe as different types of food because they all are styled differently with a different umbrella. Our mission is we are not a research-intensive university. In fact, of the 10 universities in Florida, we actually do the lowest amount of funded research. That doesn't mean we don't do an awful lot of research and a lot of quality research. To gain tenure or remain tenured, you have to continue to research. But we are a regional university, or a comprehensive, focused on the needs of the region. And in the mission and vision, I think really the first sentence under vision is really sort of captures what we're striving to do, which is to be a preeminent public institution of higher learning that will serve the North Florida region at a level of national quality. There's a number of words in there that would jump out. One of the key foci of our board has been on quality. There's been mention of focus on graduation rates, which of course we do, but the quality of the educational experience has been a key focus of our board, and with us today is our board chair, Dr. Bruce Taylor, and also our provost, Earl Trainum, to my right. But the board in the beginning found that it has established a couple of principles that they wanted to adhere to. One was that focus on quality, one was focus. But a word that I use a lot is relevance, that we want to be relevant to the economic needs of the Northeast Florida region, to the societal needs, the cultural needs, etc. Go to the next one. And to address those, we find ourselves very much linked to the region, to the economic needs, to the cultural needs of the region. And so to focus on those, we've wrapped around a couple of different things. One is a culture of completion. UNF did not have freshmen until the mid to late 1980s. It was essentially a commuter school. And when the Board of Trustees was created, the board wanted to focus, as I said, on the quality and to really shift the type of institution that we were. And so over the past 10 to 15 years, we are no longer a commuter campus. We're really third in terms of the state, in terms of the percentage of students that go to work full time. But we're focusing now on moving that graduation rate up. 2/3 of our students work, 1/3 work full time. So it's very, very difficult for a student to graduate while working those many hours outside. The second, I've already mentioned, to serve the needs of Northeast Florida as a nationally recognized institution. We'll touch on those in a minute. And then finally, to fulfill a commitment to access and diversity. This slide shows our focus on really the quality of the incoming freshmen in the upper left box. We've made about a 70-point jump in terms of the entering SAT scores of freshmen. We've actually gained about 70 points on the University of Florida, which is, of course, the state's flagship. On the upper right, it shows the retention rates into the second year, where we bumped that up into the low to mid 80s, and we'll come back with that in the graduation slide in just a little bit. And then the bottom right shows the 6-year graduation rates on our target. As I'm sure others will tell you, it's darn hard to move a graduation rate, even really a 1/10 of a point. But as the quality of these freshmen are going up, the graduation rate is likewise moving upward and is above the national average at this point. We have, for many years, we had approximately 10% of our students that went the first few years to UNF and then transferred to either Florida or Florida State. And then we've also tracked those that graduate from another institution. So if you look there, that really adds about 17 points to the graduation rate when you look at those that transfer to another SUS, again, primarily in Gainesville and Tallahassee. It used to be much more than that, but that's dropped down. One of the things that we've done to drive on the graduation rate is to focus on the connection of the students with the university. As a former commuter campus with not a football program, it's a relatively new campus. I've given out essentially half of the degrees, so most of our graduates are literally, under about 32 years old. But we have found that if we can connect our students with professors early, if we can get the students to attach to the campus by being in a community of some kind, if we have an active campus life, and this board helped us address that a couple of years ago with a student life fee that our students added to really elevate the campus activities. And the last bullet up there just shows the Osprey Nation is attachment to the athletic program, but it grew in just 1 year from really a handful of students to almost 1,000. And those are the kinds of things, believe it or not, that bond a student through, tend to lead a student to wanting to commit to graduate and remain on that campus to get through. So there's a lot of little touch points that you work on. Orientation we've worked on to change. We realize that students from different backgrounds need different support systems. I know the question will come from Governor Levine about minority enrollment. We're about 25% minority. Our minorities actually graduate at a higher rate than the white students and have a slightly higher grade point average. So it's a major focus of us, and we've learned if we focus these support systems on students and student groups that it essentially guarantees retention and then graduation. There's a reference here to the Jacksonville Commitment Cohort. This is a joint program that we've done with the other three colleges in Jacksonville, in Duval County, where the community made a commitment that any child from a poor family that graduates from high school could get a free 4-year ride or a 2-year ride to the community college, a 4-year ride to the other 3 institutions. These are students that are coming from impoverished backgrounds, below the federal poverty line, and we had a 93% retention rate of these students, but it's by building major support, tutoring, support systems behind those students. Unfortunately, the city of Jacksonville was funding a portion of those scholarships, and we were raising the rest privately. So we've kind of got that on a little bit of hibernation. But what it proves to me is with appropriate student support, we can get the students on through. We'll go to the next one. One of the things that we did for this past fall was to, with a waiver provision, but to do a mandatory freshman housing. It's really not a mandatory, it's more strongly encouraged. The national data shows a 7 to 8% higher graduation rate if students live on campus their freshman year as opposed to live, in a house at the beach and go surfing. We tracked our data for 3 particular years, and we found a significantly higher graduation rate if students lived on campus the freshman year as opposed to not. On the next slide, you'll see the delta that we saw, that if they didn't live on campus, it was a graduation rate in the 30s. It jumped up for the freshmen that started in 04 and 05, but it was significantly higher if they lived on campus for at least a semester. And the way we looked at it, it was sort of like the FDA dealing with a drug in a drug trial. When you see that significant of a change, anywhere from a 25 to 30% improvement if someone lives on campus that first year. Although it'll cost that student more the first year to live on campus as opposed to, or may if they're living at home, or it won't if they're living in an apartment nearby. Over their 4 to 6 year tenure, it actually is going to save those students money because they're going to get out more quickly. The next slide will show the differences. It actually has a 1/10 of a point higher grade point average if a student lives on campus. They attempt more hours and successfully complete more hours. Again, if you stretch that over the course of a student's career, they literally will knock a semester or so off of graduation. And we show a pretty significantly higher increase, the very bottom of this slide, about 11%, 10.5% increase of those that have already pre-registered for this coming fall. When our board adopted this policy, we called it an experiment. We wanted to make sure that we didn't hurt students, so we literally have waived about 300 students out of this policy that want to live at home or live nearby. A surprising number have, at least to me, had dietary problems, religious issues, or were taking care of another family member who really needed to be at home. So we've been pretty liberal on that, but we really encourage those that can afford it, have that freshman year, and you have a marked improvement, and really, again, overall, it's going to save those particular students money. The next slide shows the increase in the degrees that have been awarded. You can see a pretty steady increase, and it's really, I think, we've held enrollment pretty much flat. We actually decreased enrollment in the fall of '08 when the budget cuts were kicking in, and we've kind of wobbled around, and another slide will show those numbers, but those increases are really, I think, because of the boost in the graduation rate. Less than half of our freshmen come from the Northeast Florida area, not Jacksonville, but the surrounding counties. But this slide shows 58% stay in the Northeast Florida area. It's been as high as 3/4. It's dropped a little bit now. The moving outside of Florida has shown a bit of an increase as some of the jobs in New York and Washington and Chicago have taken our students out. The percentage of degrees in strategic areas are in the bottom part of this slide. It's about 1/3 in the bachelor's level. We've seen a dramatic increase in the graduate level. We've added a couple of degrees at the master's and doctoral level that you'll see a little bit later. And so we're running a little bit over 1/3 at the graduate level that are in the targeted area. 73% of the graduates of our graduates are employed in Florida a year after graduation. And by this metric, UNF is number one. We have the highest percentage of students that are employed in Florida after graduation. It's a bit of a flawed metric in that it doesn't show if somebody's employed outside of the state, doesn't show how much money they're making, and it doesn't show if they're going into graduate school. So it's a little bit unfair, but again, it's the data that we have. If you look at the right hand of this slide, though, that universities made a new list that just was released, I think, last week, 60 low-cost colleges with graduates who earn high starting salaries. So by this metric, the graduates that we have, again, the bulk of which stay in the Jacksonville area because we've linked them up with internships and those kinds of things. And then the college database just came out, and it ranked UNF fifth among the top colleges for the highest financial return on investment in Florida. Some of this is, of course, a result of the relatively low tuition relative to the next of the country, but it also reflects the earnings that our students are making when they do graduate. Again, sort of tracking the template, our longer term objective, and it's really sort of been the folklore when I arrived 10 years ago, was that the campus would grow to about 25,000. Kind of the internal thoughts are above that. It's a little different flavor, personality, etc. We think we can preserve sort of an intimacy. We've striven to have the lowest class size ratio of the schools in the state. New College, of course, is an exception to that, but of the 10 universities that are listed, we've obviously had the objective to recruit the high-profile freshmen. We've focused on building and strengthening the degree programs, and particularly those that are tied to the regional needs and the institutional capacity. We'll touch on a couple of those as examples. And one of the key things that we focused on, again, that we think is going to drive our graduation rate is community-based transformational learning opportunities. We call these TLOs. And the community-based aspect, I think, is the most important. That we'd love 100% of our students to engage in off a menu of list of opportunities that could be studying abroad, it could be an artistic performance, research as an undergrad with a faculty member, but all of these off this menu are tied to try to increase the students' employability and also their success in college. And so this has also driven us to want to collaborate with partners in the community with those linkages. This shows the trends over time in distance learning and hybrid, where we'll be closing in on a fifth of the classes are offered there. We have not adopted so far the distance learning classes that have high enrollment. We tend to cap them at 35 because it allows a lot of interactivity. It allows the critical thinking skills, the writing skills to be developed, as opposed to the kind of the massive online sorts of classes. But we're stepping into this and in a fairly aggressive way. And here's another slide just showing that the increase is pretty significant over the last few years and into the next few years in terms of the distance learning classes. I mentioned before the community-based learning. The Carnegie Foundation will classify universities in different categories, and they established a category called community-engaged universities. Again, these are universities that are connected to their region, internships, connected in terms of, it's the relevance concept that I said right at the beginning. And about 5% of the colleges in the country have been awarded this designation, and UNF was in the first group and remains in this group. It's only about 350 schools with that classification. And then we also, the last few years, have been on the President's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll, because again, we believe connecting the students with employers, with community groups, community activities, it's a better educational experience, and it fulfills our mission to be relevant to the Northeast Florida region. This slide shows that the percentage of students that are engaged in these activities, and it's gone up by about 50% in just the last few years, and we intend to be one of the leading schools in the country in terms of that type of activity. We've sort of lumped our programs into three categories that we call internally constellations, where we have some particular strengths or there's some particular needs in the region. Coastal science is one, and it lists the various programs underneath there. Healthcare and biomedical science, the Northeast Florida area is a major healthcare center, the Mayo Clinic and HCA Hospital, and then two religiously oriented, Baptist and St. Vincent's, a Catholic chain, as well as major rehab centers. So we've long been linked to those needs, and we really even shape and develop our curriculum. We've got a couple new proposed degrees that are as a result of our partnerships with the healthcare industry in terms of their needs. And then the third umbrella is commerce. I particularly mentioned the transportation and logistics program. That we've designated, we've got 6 programs we've designated as flagships, where we provided some extra funding to try to help take those programs to the next level. Jacksonville, because it's got one of the 4 largest ports on the East Coast, it's headquartered for one of the 4 remaining railroads or major railroads in the country. This program is actually 13th ranked in the country, and we do not have master's or doctorate degrees in this program. The 12 ahead of us all have doctoral programs, so it's a major area where we tried to really link with the region in terms of their needs and produce. These are some new programs we're looking at. Just the first 2 I'll touch on now, which is radiography and a bachelor's in medical lab science. This is after consulting with the area hospitals that historically these have been able to be satisfied with either a 2-year or a certificate program, and the hospitals have wanted really a higher level of training and really at the bachelor's level. So we're partnering up with Mayo on those particular areas. In each of the others, there's either a strategic emphasis reason or an internal strength that's just particularly strong group of faculty or connections. Go to the next. In terms of some of the national rankings, again, that was in our mission/vision statement. For the 2nd year in a row, they've moved us among the best regional universities. We've jumped up 7 spaces. It's kind of hard to move those very much, but I do anticipate we're going to be in the 30s in the next year or so. We've been ranked as a best value or a best buy by Forbes, Princeton, and Kiplinger. We're ranked as among 60 low-cost colleges with graduates who earn high starting salaries. And then I mentioned the college database, the ranking number 5 among top colleges for financial return on investment. This shows the percentage of our freshmen, or FTIC, that receive need-based aid. We're almost 1/3 of our students get Pell Grants, which means they come from families that are below the federal poverty line. And those, of course, are a group of students that are difficult to graduate at the traditional rate. But again, it's a connection to the community. These are students that do meet the admission standards here. So we've seen almost a doubling of the need-based aid that we've given out, and we've been doing that internally out of our internal budget and out of our fundraising, private fundraising. This slide shows really a commitment. One of the things we focus on is student debt. I know that individual board members have been very worried about this. It shows us just below the y-axis, or up and down, shows the percentage of students that have debt. Our percentage is, I think, just 1% off the lowest in the system. These are all other schools in the system. And then it's also the lowest dollar amount of debt. And so we are able to string together either need-based or merit-based aid to allow our students to graduate with a very low level of debt and a low percentage of students with debt. These are just each year we've done this, we've sort of bulleted a few things that we focused on in terms of finding ways to cut corners and save money. Our administration and finance staff is really terrific at looking at ways to make every dollar go further. Everybody's got some examples of these, but those are just a few bullets of those. We've done some privatizing that saves some things. This slide I actually had the staff just run a couple of days ago, that if you take our budget and compare it to the number of degrees, each degree we're 3rd in the state in terms of the lowest cost. And again, every one of these slides can be polished a couple different ways. The research universities obviously spend more. Schools with higher graduation rates will spend a little bit less, but I think it's a pretty good marker that it's a good value for the state of Florida. And I'm about to have my 3rd child go into UNF. It's number 1 on his list, and so I obviously believe in the quality of the education that goes on there, and then the ability of the students to get jobs in the community or elsewhere. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I finished up early, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the terrific report. I'll open up to board members. Governor Levine.
Just a quick question. I noticed that the number of people or the percentage of your graduates that work in Florida at 75%. What can you attribute that to anything specific, or did it just happen?
Yeah, it's very intentional on our part, in that community-based learning concept, that we really are truly about these connections with the community. So we have a high percentage of students that intern. I know in my previous careers I loved hiring interns because you saw how they were going to do, and so we've been very, very lucky with that, and tied in with an awful lot of great employers, clerkships, those kinds of things. So and I think a lot of it's an advantage when you're in a metropolitan area that you've got a larger business presence to be able to link your students up with. Who's low on that slide would be the University of Florida. But obviously, they've got a lot of students that are going to graduate school and a lot of students that are going out of state. So that's why I'm saying it can be a little bit misleading, because obviously the graduates from that school do very, very well, at least within a few years of graduation.
Right,
They do
they just
very,
may
very
not
well.
stay in Florida then.
Right, right.
Governor Beard.
Yes, Mr. President, I see that you're trying to grow your number of students to about 25,000 pretty soon. The physical plant you've got obviously won't handle that. What kind of facilities do you feel like you're going to need to get there and handle these students adequately?
Yeah, we're about 1,400 acres. Florida State, I think, is about 450 or 500 by ways of comparison. So we've got plenty of room, but a substantial portion of that are wetlands. We actually froze enrollment in '08, and we'd been growing 500-600 students a year prior to that, but we froze it with the budget cutbacks because we didn't want to punish our existing students by if we couldn't replace retiring faculty members because of the budgets, we wouldn't have the classes to offer them. And so when we're going to hit that number, it'll kind of depend when the state's going to be able to start funding enrollment growth. We literally, a lot of our classrooms, we couldn't put more students in under the fire code. So we don't have the option of just simply sort of growing them up. And again, our focus has been more on our teaching mission than the research mission. We still do we do tens of millions of dollars worth of research, but relative to our sister institutions, the funded dollars are much less, so the teaching experience is key. Obviously, what we're going to need is more offices for faculty, we need more faculty, and we would need more classrooms. And we've master planned that out to the 25,000, down to the parking spaces we were going to need to get that done.
And so what is that number?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Oh, well,
Probably about 18,000. Yeah, probably about 2/3 of that total.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that ratio or not. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess the question is, how much money are we looking at to get to the facilities that you need to get to the 25,000 in the way of new facilities?
Yeah, well, of course, we've got two issues. One's the operational budget, the other's the capital budget. The operational budget would need to grow roughly 50%, and it's low per capita right now. We're really, UNF's about 40% below the national average on the funding per student.
Right.
And then the capital request, that would be, tens of millions of dollars to get the buildings up.
Well, without PICO, it's going to be interesting as to how we get there, is I guess my point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the other reason we can't really grow right now, is that we don't have the space to put the students in. Hopefully, PICO's very erratic. Sometimes it's been $500 million for higher ed, and then it's been nothing. And hopefully that'll start to come back, and we can start to kind of plan. But it's tough to plan if you don't know if you're going to have the space. Yeah.
Right.
Governor Morton.
I'm going to be like a dog with a bone. The particular issue I see is the aggressive plan to grow to 25,000, again, in face of some of my previous comments. 80 to 90% of the jobs in the state of Florida in the next decade do not require a traditional baccalaureate degree. State of Florida said that, I didn't. So I just think when you combine online learning, massive open online courses, the obvious need for the expansion of certificate and associate degree programs in the state of Florida, I think we have to be very leery and very cautious of setting growth plans that may run contra to what is really needed in the state of Florida. That's just an observation.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that. We turned down 3/4 of the freshmen, so we got plenty of people knocking at the door. And secondly, it isn't aggressive in terms of a time frame, because we don't have a time frame for that. And if we were going to say it was in 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years, yeah, I think that would be a good point. And then finally, we're really in the Northeast Florida, in the Jacksonville, Duval County area, what we call the Crown region. There's 3 other institutions, only 2 that provide bachelors, and they're very, very small. So in terms of regional need, there's a demand there. It's just we're having to turn them down. And they are doing what you were predicting, is they're tending to go to the state college and getting a 2-year degree or occasionally a 4-year degree. But again, because our admission standards are where they are, we're able to get the quality students that are going to go on to get the bachelor's degree. But it's a good observation overall.
Yeah, I wanted to have kind of a follow-up. You said 3/4 of your freshmen are being turned down. Do they all reach your SAT or ACT level and the GPA, or are they below that number?
Well, kind of the way admissions work is you stack them by GPA and SAT, high to low, and then you cut it off based on how many, you assume a certain percentage aren't going to show up. And so we obviously could lower our admission standards, and we could hit 25,000 in a couple of years. The board and the university have chosen to focus on the quality of the incoming freshmen and the quality of the output, the quality of the educational experience. So hence, since '08, we really haven't grown.
Are you going against the 2+2 when you're trying to increase that number?
No,
or are you? Because I thought you had a very good relationship with your state college.
We do, yeah. And also with the St. John's River Community College. We've got a great 2+2 arrangement. We have a couple programs that are now limited access that students can't transfer into unless they have a certain grade point average at that level. And actually, the students that transfer from the state colleges actually graduate with a slightly higher GPA than those that begin as freshmen and graduate slightly quicker than those that begin as freshmen at UNF. But we're getting, a small number out of a very big funnel, and they're really the aggressive, the Chargers that are doing that. We've been very satisfied with the transfers. And you're right, Governor Tripp, the relationship, in fact, I think, we presented here when the board met in Jacksonville, the community college president and I did, about that relationship.
Governor Hussaini.
Mr. President, on graduation rate, can you talk to us about that? Your graduation rate is about 47% and 48%. What can you do to improve that? These are the students that in 6 years don't graduate. 53% of the students don't graduate in 6 years.
Well, another 15% are graduating from either another Florida institution or another institution, so that jumps it on up. That we had for many years people sort of used us as the first 2 years and then went to either Gainesville or Tallahassee. That percentage is dropping. The trend line, I think, is the thing to look at. Over the last 10 years, the graduation rate's going up. In the fall of '08, when we rolled back admissions because of the budget cuts, the quality of the freshmen really jumped. And so I think when that cadre gets through, I think we're going to see a pretty big jump. But all of the things we went through, the bonding to the campus, the tying up with the faculty, the engagement with the community through one of their degree programs, all of those things are things that we think are going to really make it moving. So the trend line's really moving in the right direction. But a big thing is that you've got 2/3 of the students are working. If we could dramatically increase the need-based aid and reduce their need to work, they could focus on taking more classes to get through. And so some of that is the vestiges of the old community college from 10 or 15 years ago. And, we've made the conscious decision to shift to a traditional college. And now what we've got is, that's where we're heading. So I think that number's really going to be moving again in the next few years.
So you're saying 10-15% of those students go to another four-year institution?
Yes.
That's a really interesting. So do they go after like second year or
right?
third
They got
year?
to the third year. We have a really good retention from the freshman to the sophomore year. It's the second to the third year where we at one point I think it was somewhere between 10 and 20% were going to either UF or FSU. If we can go back a couple, it looks like it's maybe the fifth from the beginning. And then we were able to get the data from those that graduate from another institution.
Well, that's really interesting. It's almost a good answer, because it goes to UF and FSU. They improve their grades and go.
Right.
And one way on the other side, they use us or you as a college, and then they jump up.
Right. Well, and again, some were living at home, and so they want to save money their first 2 years, and they want to go follow the Gators or the Seminoles football program. This slide shows it. Here, Governor Hussaini, the bottom one shows if you add both the Florida or the other U.S. institutions where they pick up. And those that actually, the graduation rate's been moving up, and those that are transferring out is dropping. So I think we're going to really see the numbers start to jump in the next 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Governor Chauffeur.
Mr. President, in your initiatives, I see something called Constellations of Excellence. I think there's a pool in your area to have very good students at the graduate level to improve the research productivity as well. Are you thinking in terms of growth and research as you continue to establish yourself as a key undergraduate institution?
Yeah, yes, we are. You'll move those numbers if you had PhD programs. What we have at the doctoral level are professional doctorates in physical therapy and nursing practice, and in education. We're looking at one in nutrition that's an emerging field. The healthcare industry is really demanding those at the doctoral level. But but it's probably a while before we see many in the way of the PhDs. And on campus, we do about 10 million funded research. Of course, there's a lot of unfunded research that goes on as well, particularly in the liberal arts. And the question is, what should that number be? Should it be 20 million or 30 million or 40 million? And we really haven't resolved that internally, because what it does do is it shifts the focus away from the teaching mission, which is paramount to us, that the classroom's small, the professor knows the name, you're going to get a great education, you're going to pass your licensure exam. If it's a degree that requires a license, you're going to get into med school or law school. And so we do really, really well on those. So it's a little bit of it's a conversation, and we haven't resolved it yet internally.
Thank you.
You know, again, we're trying to position ourselves like a small private liberal arts institution with 4 professional, you know, in health and business and education, et cetera, that are attached to the school. So we're unlike the previous 2. We want to focus really on kind of that core liberal arts and sciences, along with the key professional programs that link to the regional needs, both economically, civically, culturally, et cetera.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and I would like a second to the following motion. I move that the committee approves that portion of the University of North Florida's work plan associated with the 2013-14 academic year, excluding those sections of the work plan that require any additional regulatory or procedural review or approval pursuant to law or board regulations, and that the committee accepts the out-year portions of the work plan. We have a second? So moved. We got a second? We got a motion second? We got any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chairman. Thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.